I first noticed something was off when the wooden stake appeared by the edge of my dock. It was crooked, jammed into the soft dirt and spray-painted neon orange. At first, I thought some kids had been playing around. Then another stake showed up the next day, this one labeled Lot B7, Expansion Boundary. And then another. By the end of the week, a full rectangle had been plotted right into the shallow bend of my lake, wrapping around the inlet that fed into my land. It didn't make sense. I've lived here for 25 years. I bought this property when the trees were still thin, when the lake shimmered quiet and wild, when this whole patch of land was considered too soft and remote for the cookie-cutter homes the HOA now governed. Back then, it was just me and some deer in the water. Now it was me and them. The HOA hadn't always been the problem. For years, they were just newsletters and holiday potlucks. But leadership changed 2 years ago when Carl Scheckler took over. A real estate developer turned community visionary. He promised beautification and higher property values. What he delivered was red mulch, overregulation, and endless construction proposals. Still, none of it touched me, until now I went to the next HOA meeting. I didn't even make it past the sign-in table before a thin woman in a navy pantsuit stepped in front of me. Clipboard clutched like a weapon. "Mr. Bradshaw, you're here about the lake boundary, aren't you?" "I am," I said. "How exactly is it legal for you to redraw property lines without notifying me?" She didn't answer. She just said, "Carl will walk you through the development plan. You'll see, it's very exciting, walking trails, viewing platforms, a mixed-use dock, all on my land." Then I saw Carl across the room wearing that half-smile, half-smirk like he already knew I'd lost. They didn't let me speak. I raised my hand twice, waved away both times while the projector displayed shiny renderings. Curved footbridges, cat rentals, an amphitheater on top of my lily pond. They called it community revitalization. I called it theft. Afterward, I confronted Carl in the hallway. "You can't do this. The lake is on my deed. You know it is." Carl didn't raise his voice. "Actually, Henry, we recently discovered that portions of the lake fall under common area designation. Ambiguity in the old plat maps. Surveys get updated. Land shifts, Bull, I have the original survey." "Surveys get updated," he repeated. "If you'd like, you can attend the zoning committee meeting. But the board has already voted." He smiled. "And you're not technically in the HOA. That's why we're moving forward with annexation." Annexation. They were trying to absorb my property into the HOA. It wasn't about money for me. This lake is where I scattered my wife's ashes 10 years ago, where my son learned to fish before deployments, where I sit every Sunday morning with coffee and birdsong. It's not just water. It's memory. It's home. I went home and gathered every document I had, the deed, surveyor's report, tax records, aerial photographs. I didn't sleep. Papers spread across the kitchen table like a battle plan. The next morning, the HOA posted big plastic signs at the lake, future site of Sunset Commons. I walked down there and tore one down. 3 hours later, a violation notice was taped to my door. That was their first mistake. They made it official. Now it was paper against paper, and I was ready. Soon came letters, notices, citations. They accused me of interfering with community development initiatives. They demanded I remove my own dock. They scheduled hearings where I was allowed only to observe. They tried to grind me down through paperwork and intimidation. But I didn't back down. I went to the county recorder's office and spent 6 hours digging up files. I found a signed affidavit confirming the lake boundary as private property. Mine. Then the HOA sent landscaping crews to start altering the shoreline. I confronted them, binder in hand, but they kept working. So I called a lawyer, Martin Greer, a bulldog. He filed a cease and desist order, but the HOA escalated. Pump trucks arrived at dawn and started draining the lake. My lake. Water dropped 20 feet in days. Fish flopped on cracked mud. The air began to stink. My dock hung exposed like a broken rib. And then I found Gus Miller, the old land surveyor. He walked the dry basin with me, tapping the ground. Hollow, thin, unstable. "You've got a sinkhole formation," he said. "This whole place is a corked hourglass. The lake water is the pressure holding the ground together. Drain it and the limestone collapses. We documented everything." He wrote the official report. I tried to submit it to the HOA. They refused to accept it. So I mailed it to every board member, their legal firm, and the county zoning office. That's when the threats started. My mailbox smashed. citations piling in, property harassment. But the land was speaking too. Cracks opened in the dry earth. Long, jagged, dark cracks. The ground was warning us. A county inspector came. He saw the danger. He agreed to file a stop work order. The HOA scheduled another meeting, trying to rush construction. So I went. Not quietly, not politely. I stood in the middle of that beige meeting hall, with every document, every photograph, every signature, every survey. Carl tried to talk over me. I raised my voice. You are building on unstable ground. You are endangering this entire community. And you know it. The room fell silent. I showed them the geological overlays, the fissures, the sinkhole core samples, Gus's licensed report, the county filings. For the first time, Carl's smile broke. People in the audience shifted, looked scared, looked betrayed, because now the truth wasn't just in my words, it was under their feet. Instability. It's already been drained. The water's gone. I turned to face him, which is exactly what destabilized it. A few residents began whispering. Someone near the front raised their phone and started recording. Carl stood up. That's enough, Mr. Bradshaw. You are out of order, and this is not a forum for fear-mongering. No, I said. This is the only forum that hasn't buried the truth. You can ignore my letters. You can dismiss my property, but you can't ignore the ground. Carl leaned closer across the table. You're an angry old man yelling at clouds. That's all. I'm a homeowner, I said. And you're a parasite feeding off what's not yours. The tension in the room crackled like dry brush. I turned to the rest of the residents. When this collapses, and it will collapse, you'll be the ones paying the assessments, rebuilding, suing, not, Carl, not his board, you, since. Then, a voice from the back, Alan. Again, maybe we should slow this down. Carl's smile faltered. That was the first crack, not enough to stop them, but it was the beginning. As I walked out, Donna Hall called after me, voice clipped with disdain. You'll be hearing from our legal counsel. I didn't turn around. I hope they read geology reports better than you do. I left, boots echoing on the cheap laminate floor, wondering how long it would take before the ground made my case for me. They came just before sunrise. 4 flatbeds, a bulldozer, a backhoe, and a cement mixer crawled up the freshly graded road like an armored convoy. The rumble shook my windows. I stood on my porch with a thermos of black coffee, watching silhouettes move against the gray morning sky like a dream turning sour. This wasn't exploratory work. This was construction. Real commitment. Despite everything I'd presented, despite Gus Miller's report and the fissures, the HOA was moving forward. They were building their clubhouse in the center of the crater. Within the hour, steel bit into clay, backhoes carving trenches across what had once been the lake's deepest point. Rebar laid like bones, concrete molds rising. The workers moved too fast, like they were racing something. No one was admitting out loud, Carl, and his board wanted the footings in place before any injunction could land. Concrete in the ground complicates everything. It becomes sunk cost, irreversible. I called Greer, my lawyer. They're pouring foundations. Hell, that fast? No permits posted, no inspections, just trucks and headlamps. I'll file an emergency injunction, he said. But judges don't like to intervene unless someone's in immediate physical danger. It's not about property lines, I said. It's about the ground collapsing under them, literally. He paused. Send photos. Today. I marched to the basin edge, boots sinking into damp, cracking soil. I photographed everything, the machines, the trenches, the rebar. The crew boss pacing with blueprints, no permit board anywhere. Panic disguised as progress. I printed flyers and went door to door. Most didn't answer. The whispers from the HOA meeting had already gone quiet. Only Alan Michaels let me in. He studied the photos. That crack near the amphitheater line, it's bigger. It's spreading, I said, and if they pour heavy footings, it won't take much. Before I left, he signed Greer's affidavit, a start. Then the county clerk emailed, no active foundation permit. That was the crack I needed. Greer filed the emergency injunction. Hours. If they poured after that, it was on them. I slept lightly. Ringo curled near the door. At 4:12 a.m., Headlights swept my lawn, not stopping, circling. By morning, the site had doubled. They had worked through the night. They weren't building, they were outrunning the law. That evening, Gus met me at the basin. He drove a metal rod into the ground and frowned. It's worse than I thought. What happens if the weight keeps increasing? It collapses inward. The subsurface voids aren't bearing weight, they're suspended. Enough pressure and it's like loading a shelf made of paper. And if it rains? Gus looked grim. Then it doesn't crack. It swallows. That night, the rain came. By dawn, something shifted. A vibration, the ground murmuring. A massive fissure split the basin. Concrete pads snapped. A Komatsu excavator tilted into the widening void. The center of the basin sagged. Alive. I called Greer. It's happening. The ground's collapsing. He told me to call emergency management. I did. Within minutes, sirens, fire trucks. Sheriff, emergency geotech response. Leland, the inspector, recognized me. You called this. I tried to stop it. Another section caved in. Concrete disappeared into mud. Carl watched from the hill. Expression hollow. No words. The site was shut down. Media arrived. Drones buzzed. I stood in front of the cameras. They drained the lake. They destabilized the land. They ignored every warning. This wasn't an accident. This was negligence with a blueprint. Residents turned, neighbors spoke, a protest formed. By noon, I filed the petition for a full audit. Signatures. Truth spreading. That night, I walked to the crater's edge. The lake was gone, but frogs and dragonflies were returning to a puddle no bigger than a kitchen rug. Life was crawling back on its own. I smiled. The lake might not return. But the truth had, and that was enough. Microphones replaced fishing poles. Satellite vans lined the street that curved above what was now being called the Bradshaw Sinkhole. I never asked for that name. A young reporter, maybe 25, maybe younger, found me by the fence that the county had installed 2 days prior. She was all nervous energy and mascara, clutching a clipboard like it was a bulletproof vest. Mr. Bradshaw, I'm Kate, Channel 7. Do you have a few minutes? I glanced at the crater behind her, the wind tugging at the caution tape, and then nodded. She clicked on a recorder. Can you tell us in your own words what happened here? I looked directly into the lens. The ground gave out, but the truth is it didn't happen overnight. This was months in the making, maybe years. Kate leaned in. And you warned the HOA, correct? I warned them. I brought reports, geological assessments. I sat in their meetings. I filed complaints. I even went to the county. But they didn't want to hear it because listening meant stopping, and stopping meant losing money. Her cameraman zoomed in slightly. I could feel the shift in energy, how the story was landing. This wasn't just a sinkhole. This was a failure of leadership, of ethics, of basic responsibility. Later that day, I stood on the lawn with Gus as we watched the live segment play on someone's iPad. My voice was clear. My eyes held steady. Gus whistled low under his breath. They're finally listening. I nodded. Shame it took losing $500,000 and poured concrete for that to happen. But it wasn't just the media that came. Lawyers came too, first quietly, then loudly. Subpoenas were delivered to the HOA board members. Carl Scheckler's name appeared in a multi-plaintiff lawsuit filed on behalf of 40 homeowners, whose property values had plummeted after the collapse. Alan Michaels became a co-lead. So did Trina Lang after she resigned from the board and admitted through her lawyer that she'd been pressured into signing off on permits she never read. Documents leaked. Emails surfaced. Meeting minutes were re-examined. The most damning was an internal memo from 6 months prior written by Greg Myers, the HOA vice president. Yes, there's some geological concern around the old basin, but as long as we move fast and get something permanent poured, it'll be harder to reverse. They knew. They didn't just guess. They knew. And they gambled anyway. The lawsuits grew teeth. The HOA's insurance dropped them. The board scrambled, issuing half-hearted apologies and appointing interim members who swore they'd listen better. But the residents weren't waiting anymore. A vote was called to dissolve the current HOA board. It passed by a landslide, A committee of temporary stewards was formed. Longtime residents like Alan and Marcia Porter, people with no ambitions beyond stability. They knocked on doors, asked questions, brought meetings outside under tents where everyone could be heard. And for the first time in years, neighbors started talking to each other again. I was asked to speak at the first community town hall after the collapse. Not as a plaintiff, not as a witness, but as a neighbor. I didn't prepare anything. I just spoke from the place that still hurt. I moved here with my wife 25 years ago. We bought the land not because it was fancy or convenient, but because it was honest. The lake wasn't much to look at, but it had a soul. It gave us peace. And when she died, it gave me a place to remember her. Silence. Not heavy, but respectful. But somewhere along the way, we stopped listening to the land, and we stopped listening to each other. We let paperwork and rules and fake newsletters define who we are. We forgot that a community isn't a board, it's a bond. Heads nodded. Eyes glistened. We lost the lake. We can't get that back. But we have a crater now, a scar that reminds us what happens when we look away. Let's not look away again. Applause came anyway.